What pushes a brilliant young scholar, someone who has overcome immense odds to reach one of the top universities in their country, to take their own life? In India, for a tragic number of students, the answer is an ancient system of social hierarchy that refuses to die: caste. In response to this crisis, India's higher education regulator, the University Grants Commission, or UGC, has introduced new draft regulations for 2025. They promise to finally tackle caste discrimination on campus. But the big question is, are these new rules a genuine new chapter or just old wine in a new bottle? Welcome to G Fun Facts Online, where today we deconstruct this critical issue. To grasp the enormity of the problem, you have to look back centuries. For generations, the caste system in India wasn't just a social custom, it was a form of educational apartheid. Knowledge was the exclusive property of the upper castes, particularly the Brahmins. For those at the bottom of the hierarchy, the Shudras, and especially the Ati Shudras, now known as Dalits, seeking an education was an act of rebellion, often met with severe punishment. This wasn't just social pressure. It was sanctified by tradition. The colonial era brought complex changes, but it wasn't until social reformers like Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule in the 19th century that a real revolution began. They established schools open to everyone, regardless of caste or gender, laying the groundwork for an anti-caste movement centered on education as a tool for liberation. This movement found its most powerful voice in Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the main architect of India's constitution. Having faced immense discrimination himself to get his education, Ambedkar saw it as the ultimate weapon for the annihilation of caste. His famous call to educate, agitate, organize still echoes today. After India's independence in 1947, the new constitution, guided by Ambedkar, officially prohibited caste discrimination. It introduced reservations, a form of affirmative action, to ensure students from historically marginalized scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and later, other backward classes, could get seats in universities and government jobs. This policy was a game changer for millions, but it couldn't erase centuries of deeply ingrained prejudice. Fast forward to today. Despite these constitutional protections, caste discrimination is alive and well in India's most prestigious universities. It's often not as blatant as it once was, but it's just as damaging. Students from marginalized communities frequently report being socially ostracized by their peers, left out of study groups, and sometimes even facing segregation in dorms and dining halls, a chilling echo of past untouchability practices. More insidiously, the bias comes from the faculty. Imagine your professor questioning your intelligence simply because you got into the university through a reservation policy. Imagine being publicly labeled a quota student and having all your achievements dismissed as undeserved. This isn't just anecdotal. A shocking 2021 study in the elite Indian Institutes of Technology, or IITs, found that 70% of students from Dalit and Adivasi communities had faced caste discrimination from their professors. This included unfair grading and being deliberately excluded from important academic projects. Some faculty were even accused of giving lower marks in practical exams and interviews, effectively sabotaging a student's entire career. This relentless environment of prejudice, of having to constantly prove your worth against a wall of doubt, takes a devastating toll. It has fueled a severe mental health crisis among these students, marked by high rates of anxiety, depression, and a loss of self-esteem. And tragically, for some, the burden becomes unbearable. The alarming number of student suicides from these communities in recent years has led activists to call them institutional murders, deaths caused not by a single event, but by a systemic failure to provide a safe and inclusive space to learn. This is the grim backdrop for the new UGC regulations for 2025. On the surface, they sound promising. The UGC will now have the power to de-recognize universities that fail to curb discrimination, a significant step up from the often toothless guidelines of 2012. Every university will be mandated to establish an equal opportunity center to oversee policies for disadvantaged groups. To manage this, an equity committee will be formed, headed by the institution's leader and including faculty, civil society members, and student representatives, with mandated representation for women and members from scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities. There's also a new grievance redressal mechanism, with an online portal and a requirement for the Equity Committee to convene within 24 hours of receiving a complaint. The rules even propose proactive measures, like equity squads to monitor the campus and equity ambassadors in each department to promote a better environment. So what's the problem? Why are so many students, activists, and academics criticizing these new rules? The devil, as they say, is in the details. One of the biggest and most controversial criticisms is the new definition of caste-based discrimination. The draft defines it as discrimination against members of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes only. This completely excludes the other backward classes, or OBCs, a massive group of communities who also face significant caste-based prejudice. Critics argue this is a major, unjustifiable step back from the more inclusive 2012 regulations. The problems don't stop there. The new draft is incredibly vague about what actually constitutes a discriminatory act. The old rules provided specific examples, like announcing a student's caste publicly, or making caste-based remarks about their academic performance. The new rules offer only a generalized definition, leaving it wide open to interpretation and making it much easier for institutions to dismiss genuine complaints as not fitting the vague criteria. But perhaps the most alarming provision is the one that allows for penalizing false complaints. The draft states that anyone making a false complaint can be fined or face disciplinary action. However, it never defines what constitutes a false complaint. This has created a climate of fear. Victims of discrimination, who already face an uphill battle for justice, may now hesitate to come forward at all, afraid of being punished if they can't prove their case to a potentially biased committee. For these reasons, many activists and student organizations argue the new regulations are actually weaker, more ambiguous, and potentially more harmful to marginalized students than the ones they are meant to replace. Beyond the legal text, the lived reality for many students remains a daily struggle against prejudice. Dalit PhD student Deepa Mohanan's decade-long fight against caste bias at her university, which culminated in a hunger strike just to get access to research materials and escape public humiliation, is just one of many heartbreaking examples. So where do we go from here? The new UGC guidelines have at least forced a national conversation. But for them to be more than just paper, they need serious and immediate changes. First, the definition of discrimination must be broadened to include OBCs and other grounds like disability, which was also omitted. The vague language needs to be replaced with a clear and specific list of discriminatory acts. And the dangerous false complaint clause must be scrapped or at the very least clearly defined to prevent its misuse. But rules alone are not a silver bullet. Real change requires a systemic transformation of the entire higher education culture. It means mandatory and regular sensitization programs for all faculty, staff, and students. It means reforming the curriculum across all disciplines to include anti-caste perspectives. It means making a concerted effort to hire more faculty and administrators from marginalized communities so that students have role models, mentors, and allies in positions of power. It means creating a campus culture of absolute zero tolerance for any form of discrimination. The road to a truly equitable education system in India is long and arduous. But the fight for a future where every student, regardless of their caste or background, can feel safe, respected, and empowered to reach their full potential is a fight that cannot be abandoned. The memories of Rohit Vemula, Dr. Payal Tadvi, and so many others, whose potential was cut short by prejudice, demand nothing less. Thanks for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online.